7 companies, $1 trillion. That is not a typo, and that is not a fever dream. That is the combined value of the empires built by a single group of misfits who spent their 20s screaming at each other in a cramped office in Palo Alto. You might know them as the founders of Tesla, YouTube, LinkedIn, Yelp, Palantir, and SpaceX. But before they were the gods of Silicon Valley, they were just a bunch of sweaty, over-caffeinated nerds trying to figure out how to beam digital cash between heavy, useless handheld devices that nobody wanted. We call them the PayPal Mafia. But don't let the cool nickname fool you. This wasn't a coordinated crime syndicate with a master plan. It was a chaotic, bloody knife fight in a phone booth that somehow accidentally birthed the modern internet. Most startup stories you hear are polished fairy tales about innovation and synergy. But this story is different because it is a tragedy of errors that failed upwards so hard it broke the atmosphere. It starts with a number that should make you furious. $1.5 billion. That is what eBay paid for PayPal in 2002. At the time, it felt like the finish line, the big payout, the moment everyone pops the champagne and sails off into the sunset to buy islands and get bad plastic surgery. But for this crew, that check was just the severance package. It was the prologue. To understand how a group of people who essentially hated each other managed to rewire the global economy, you have to transport your brain back to the year 1999. Forget what you know about the internet today. There were no iPhones, no social media, and the cloud was just something that ruined your picnic. It was the peak of the dot-com bubble, a time of absolute financial hallucination where you could walk into a venture capital office, scream the word internet while wearing a clown suit, and walk out with $5 million in seed funding. It was a gold rush for people who had never held a shovel. In the middle of this hysteria sat 2 rival gangs, camped out blocks away from each other in University Avenue, Palo Alto, unaware that they were about to engage in a war of attrition that would leave them both scarred for life. On one side, you had Confinity. This was the brainchild of Peter Thiel and Max Levchin. Picture Peter Thiel not as the ominous billionaire vampire he is today, but as a libertarian philosopher who thought the government had no business touching your money. And then there was Max Levchin, a cryptography genius from the Soviet Ukraine, who looked at the U.S. banking system and saw nothing but security holes wrapped in red tape. Their big idea? It wasn't to help you buy Beanie Babies on eBay. Oh no, that was too practical. Their grand vision was to create a way to beam encrypted money between Palm Pilots. Yes, Palm Pilots. Those brick-sized digital assistants that you had to poke with a stylus like a caveman trying to start a fire. They were convinced that in the future, everyone would be walking around pointing these plastic rectangles at each other to pay for lunch. It was a solution looking for a problem that didn't exist, built on a device that was destined for the garbage bin of history. But in 1999, logic was optional, and they raised millions on the promise that they were liberating currency from the clutches of the state. On the other side of town, you had a man named Elon Musk. Back then, he wasn't the Mars-colonizing Iron Man. He was just a guy who had sold his first startup, Zip2, and had a sudden influx of $22 million burning a hole in his pocket. Instead of buying a nice house and retiring, he bought a McLaren F1, crashed it, and then poured almost all his money into a new venture called X.com. Musk didn't care about Palm Pilots. He wanted to take over the entire banking industry. He looked at banks, those dusty institutions with marble floors and bankers who went home at 5 p.m., and saw dinosaurs waiting for the asteroid. He wanted X.com to be everything: your checking account, your mortgage broker, your insurance agent, and your investment fund, all in one website. It was an ambition so massive it bordered on delusional, which, as we now know, is the Musk trademark. So here is the setup for the disaster. You have the Confinity team, the philosophical hackers trying to beam money through infrared ports, and the X.com team, the maniacal disruptors trying to kill the banking industry. They were both brilliant, they were both arrogant, and they were both aggressively wrong about what their product was actually good for. Nobody wanted to be money with a Palm Pilot, and nobody trusted a random website with their life savings. But they were about to discover the one thing the internet actually wanted: a way to email money. It sounds simple now, like discovering fire or the wheel. But at the time, moving money online was a nightmare of credit card forms and waiting periods. When Confinity stumbled upon the idea of attaching money to an email address, a pivot they made out of sheer desperation, it spread like a virus. Suddenly, they weren't just a niche product for geeks. They were the wallet of the web. And sitting right there, watching this happen with jealousy and rage, was Elon and Musk. The stage was set for a death match. These two companies were burning cash faster than a bonfire in a wind tunnel, giving away free money just to get users to sign up. They were neighbors, they were enemies, and they were both driving toward a cliff at 100 miles an hour, convinced the other guy would swerve first. Let's talk about viral growth. In a marketing textbook, viral growth is the holy grail, the moment your product spreads so fast you can't control it. But in the reality of late 1999, viral growth for Confinity and X.com was less like winning the lottery and more like catching Ebola. You see, both companies had stumbled upon the same desperate, brilliant, and incredibly stupid idea to get users. They literally paid people to sign up. If you opened an account, they put $10 in it. If you referred a friend, another $10. It was the first time in history you could make a living just by annoying your friends with email spam. This kicked off a war of attrition that makes modern corporate rivalries look like tea parties. Confinity and X.com weren't just competitors. They were neighbors in a small office park, breathing the same air and poaching the same engineers. It was a digital street fight. If X.com raised their bonus to $20, Confinity had to match it or die. They were essentially two guys standing in a room, setting piles of $100 bills on fire, staring each other in the eye and screaming, "I can do this all day." But they couldn't do it all day. They were bleeding out. Every time a college student figured out they could script a bot to sign up 1,000 fake accounts, the startups lost 10 grand in seconds. The burn rate was astronomical. They were spending money like drunken sailors, except drunken sailors usually get a beer out of the deal. These guys were just buying market share that was worthless if they went bankrupt next Tuesday. And bankruptcy wasn't a vague threat. It was a mathematical certainty. The dot-com bubble was wobbling, investors were getting jittery, and here were two companies whose business model was give away all our capital and hope a business model magically appears later. The irony was palpable. You had the geniuses of Confinity, led by Levchin and Thiel, obsessing over elegant code and the libertarian dream of digital cash. Then you had Musk at X.com, sleeping under his desk, driving his engineers to rewrite the entire banking system over a weekend. They hated each other. The Confinity team thought X.com were sloppy, aggressive hacks. The X.com team thought Confinity were pretentious, academic snobs. And yet, they were locked in a suicide pact. If they kept fighting, the sheer cost of user acquisition would kill them both before they even figured out how to make a dime. The tension broke in March 2000. It wasn't a peace treaty signed with dignity. It was a shotgun wedding held at gunpoint by reality. They looked at their bank accounts, looked at the calendar, and realized they had weeks of life left. The only way to survive was to stop fighting and combine their remaining piles of cash into one slightly larger, slightly less flammable pile. So they merged. They called the new monstrosity X.com because Musk had the bigger ego and the better domain name. But everyone just kept using the product name, PayPal. Do not mistake this for a happy ending. This wasn't the Avengers assembling. This was putting 5 alpha wolves in a phone booth and taping the door shut. They had merged the companies, but they hadn't merged the cultures. You had the Linux-loving open-source purists from Confinity suddenly having to work with the Microsoft-loving, corporate structure fans from X.com. It was oil and water, fire and gasoline. Half the engineers wanted to quit on day one. They argued about everything: the code, the name, the strategy, the office layout. But they had no choice. They were now strapped into the same rocket, and the fuse was already lit. They had survived the deathmatch against each other, only to realize the real war was about to start inside their own conference room. If you think your office politics are toxic because someone stole your yogurt from the fridge, let me tell you about the summer of 2000s. Inside the PayPal offices. The merger had happened, but peace had not. It was less of a corporate integration and more of a theological war fought by people who hadn't slept in 3 months. The company was technically called X.com, led by Elon Musk, but the product everyone actually used was PayPal. Musk, with the stubbornness that would later propel him to Mars, refused to let go of the name X.com. He thought it sounded sexy and futuristic. Everyone else thought it sounded like a website where you'd catch a computer virus while looking for adult content. Focus groups literally told them, "This sounds like a porn site." And Musk just shrugged and said, "We'll rebrand the porn." But the real civil war wasn't about the name. It was about the plumbing. This is where it gets nerdy, but stay with me because this is what almost killed the company. Musk, a self-taught coder who learned on PC manuals, demanded they rewrite the entire stack on Microsoft Windows. Max Levchin and the Confinity team, the hardcore cryptographic purists, were Unix disciples. To a non-programmer, this sounds like arguing over Pepsi versus Coke. To a programmer, this is like asking a devout vegan to start managing a slaughterhouse. Levchin's team looked at Musk's Microsoft code and saw spaghetti. They saw a crash waiting to happen. Musk looked at their open-source software and saw a mess he couldn't control. They spent weeks screaming at each other in conference rooms while the site was crashing, the fraudsters were attacking, and the money was draining away. The engineers were on the verge of mutiny. Something had to give. And then Elon Musk made the classic mistake of the workaholic paranoid. He took a vacation. It wasn't just a vacation. It was his honeymoon. He had just married his first wife, Justine, and they were planning a trip to the Sydney Olympics. It was supposed to be a fundraiser trip, a chance to woo investors and finally relax. But in the Shark Tank of Silicon Valley, leaving your chair is an invitation to lose it. The moment the wheels of Musk's plane left the tarmac, the knives came out. It was a coup d'etat, straight out of a Shakespearean tragedy, but played out by guys in cargo shorts. While Musk was cruising at 30,000 feet, sipping tomato juice and dreaming of global banking domination, Peter Thiel, Max Levchin, and David Sachs were on the ground, rallying the board of directors. They presented a simple ultimatum: it's Elon or the company. They argued that Musk's insistence on the Microsoft switch would crash the platform, that the X.com brand was toxic, and that his management style was driving away the talent. It was brutal, it was swift, and it was entirely done behind his back. They petitioned the board to fire Musk as CEO and reinstall Peter Thiel. Imagine this scene. Elon Musk lands in Australia. He turns on his phone, expecting congratulations, or maybe a server update. Instead, he finds out he has been decapitated. He is no longer the CEO of his own company. Most people would have gone nuclear. They would have sued, leaked dirty laundry to the press, or burned the building down. And to be fair, Musk was furious. He immediately hopped on the next plane back to Palo Alto, likely fuming the entire 14-hour flight. But when he landed, reality set in. He realized that if he fought a public war, the company, and his massive equity stake in it, would go to zero. So, in a moment of shocking pragmatism, the man with the biggest ego in the world swallowed his pride. He accepted the role of advisor, stepped aside, and let Peter Thiel take the wheel. The X.com name was buried, until he resurrected it for Twitter 20 years later, because apparently he never forgets a grudge, and the company became PayPal, officially and forever. The king was dead. Long live the Mafia. So, Elon Musk was out, Peter Thiel was back in, and the PayPal Mafia had successfully executed its first political assassination. You would think this was the moment they could pop the champagne and relax, right? Wrong. In the spring of 2000, while they were busy stabbing each other in the back, the rest of the world decided to catch fire. The dot-com bubble, that glorious hallucination of free money, burst with the violence of a supernova. The Nasdaq lost a third of its value in weeks. Investors who had been throwing cash at them like confetti suddenly zipped their wallets shut. And right at this moment, when PayPal needed money the most, they discovered they were being robbed, not by a guy in a ski mask, but by the entire Russian organized crime network. Enter Igor. That wasn't the name of a specific person, but the nickname the PayPal team gave to the terrifyingly efficient Russian mobsters who had targeted their platform. The scam was brutally simple. The mob would buy thousands of stolen credit card numbers on the black market, use automated bots to create thousands of fake PayPal accounts, and then drain the money before anyone realized the credit cards were stolen. It was a digital smash and grab. At one point, PayPal was losing over $10 million a month, a burn rate that was less like a leak and more like a severed artery. They weren't just losing money, they were hemorrhaging it. The situation was so dire that Visa and MasterCard threatened to cut them off completely. If the credit card networks blocked PayPal, the company would be dead in approximately 5 minutes. The engineers, led by Max Levchin, realized that the FBI was useless here. Law enforcement moved at the speed of government, and the Russian mob moved at the speed of fiber optics. So, they had to become the police. They built a piece of software they literally named Igor to hunt the fraudsters. This wasn't just code. It was the birth of the modern digital immune system. They invented the CAPTCHA. Those annoying squiggly letters you have to type to prove you're not a robot. Specifically, to stop the Russian bots from creating accounts. They were fighting a cyber war against the Mafia during the day and sleeping under their desks at night. But wait, it gets worse. As if the bankruptcy and the mobsters weren't enough, the government finally woke up. State regulators, particularly from places like Louisiana and California, looked at PayPal and said, "Hey, you're holding people's money. That makes you a bank. You don't have a banking license. Go to jail." The PayPal team had to scramble to construct a legal argument that was basically a semantic magic trick. They argued they weren't a bank. They were a money transmitter, a glorified digital Western Union. It was a distinction without a difference to everyone except the lawyers, but it was the only thing keeping the founders out of handcuffs. They were fighting a war on 3 fronts. The economy was collapsing, the mob was looting the vault, and the government was trying to shut off the power. Every single day was a coin toss between global domination and federal prison. If you want to understand how ruthless this team actually was, you have to look at how they treated eBay. Most startups try to build a platform. PayPal decided to hijack one. By early 2000, they realized that while palm-to-palm payments were a bust, there was a specific group of people on the internet who were desperate to move money fast. eBay power sellers. These were people selling Beanie Babies and antique spoons to strangers in Ohio, and they were stuck using checks and money orders. It was the Stone Age. You'd win an auction, mail a check, wait a week for it to arrive, wait another week for it to clear, and then finally get your spoon. PayPal looked at this friction and saw a gold mine. But there was a problem. eBay already had a payment system. It was called BillPoint, a joint venture with Wells Fargo, and eBay was pushing it down everyone's throats. So the PayPal Mafia declared war. But this wasn't a fair fight. It was an insurgency. They executed what can only be described as the parasite strategy. They realized they didn't need permission to be on eBay. They just needed to be louder than the landlord. They built a bot. Yes, another bot that would scour eBay auctions. If a seller listed an item, the bot would automatically email them saying, "Hey, I want to buy this," but can I pay with PayPal? It created a phantom demand. Sellers thought, wow, everyone loves this PayPal thing, not realizing they were talking to a script written by a sleep-deprived engineer in Palo Alto. Then came the branding assault. They created a little HTML code snippet that allowed sellers to embed the PayPal logo directly into their auction descriptions. It was bright, it was shiny, and it said, I accept PayPal. It was a badge of honor. BillPoint, by comparison, was a clunky bureaucratic mess that required endless forms. PayPal was just an email address and a password. It was the difference between filing your taxes and sending a text message. The sellers who just wanted to get paid defected in droves. They plastered the PayPal logo over everything. It was like going into a McDonald's and seeing stickers for Burger King on every table. eBay tried to fight back. They banned the bots. They changed the rules. They tweaked the algorithms to favor BillPoint. But it was too late. The virus had taken hold. PayPal was growing faster on eBay's own platform than eBay's own product. It was humiliating. Imagine inviting a guest to your house, and by dinner time, they're sitting at the head of the table carving the turkey while your kids call them dad. That is what PayPal did to Meg Whitman and the eBay executive team. They embarrassed a giant in its own backyard. The climax of this abusive relationship was the realization by eBay that they couldn't kill the parasite without killing the host. The buyers wanted PayPal. The sellers wanted PayPal. If eBay banned it, the users would revolt. BillPoint was bleeding money and gaining zero traction because it was built by bankers who cared about compliance, while PayPal was built by maniacs who cared about speed. Finally, in July 2002, eBay waved the white flag. They didn't just give up. They surrendered unconditionally. They agreed to acquire PayPal for $1.5 billion in stock. To the outside world, it looked like a happy marriage. In reality, it was eBay paying $1 billion ransom to get their own house back. The pirates had boarded the ship, looted the captain's quarters, and then sold the ship back to the captain. It was the ultimate victory. On paper, October 2002 was the happiest month of their lives. The deal closed. eBay wired $1.5 billion in stock to the shareholders of PayPal. For the founders, this was the moment the credits should have rolled. Elon Musk walked away with over $165 million. Peter Thiel got $55 million. Reid Hoffman, Luke Nosek, Roelof Botha, they were all instantly, obscenely wealthy. They had won the game. They had taken a chaotic, broken idea and turned it into a global standard, defeating the mob, the banks, and the regulators along the way. But if you look at the photos from that time, nobody looks happy. They look like they're at a wake. Because in Silicon Valley, getting acquired isn't always a graduation. Sometimes it's a lobotomy. The moment the ink was dry, the PayPal pirates were dragged off their speedboats and shoved onto the eBay cruise liner. And let me tell you, the culture shock was violent. You have to remember, PayPal was a company run by libertarians, maniacs, and insomniacs who solved problems by screaming at each other until the best idea won. They didn't have processes. They had adrenaline. If a feature was broken, they fixed it at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday. If a regulation was in the way, they ignored it until they got sued. eBay, on the other hand, was in a corporate. It was a place of endless meetings, PowerPoint presentations, and decision-making by committee. It was the DMV of the internet. The PayPal crew would walk into a meeting proposing a radical new feature that could double revenue, and the eBay executives would nod politely and say, "That's interesting. Let's form a subcommittee to study the feasibility of that for Q3 of next year." It drove them insane. For people like Musk and Thiel, hearing the words "let's circle back" is a fate worse than death. They were used to driving a Ferrari at 200 mph. Now, they were stuck in a minivan in rush hour traffic, listening to soft rock. This is where the legend of the PayPal Mafia truly begins. In a normal acquisition, the founders stay on for a few years. They wear the golden handcuffs, vesting their stock options, playing golf, and slowly losing their relevance. But this group? They chewed their own arms off to escape. They looked at the comfortable, safe, slow life of a corporate executive and chose chaos instead. They realized they were fundamentally unemployable. They couldn't work for a boss, especially not a boss who thought innovation meant changing the font color on the homepage. So, they left, not one by one, but in a mass exodus. Musk was out. Thiel was out. Hoffman, Sachs, Levchin. They all grabbed their cash and sprinted for the exit. It wasn't just a resignation. It was a rejection of the status quo. They looked at the $1.5 billion outcome and thought, that was too small. It sounds arrogant, and it was, but they were possessed by a terrifying ambition. They had just spent 4 years in a pressure cooker that taught them that the impossible was just an engineering problem. They had beaten the banking system. Why couldn't they beat the auto industry, or the space industry, or the intelligence community? The sale to eBay was the spark. If they had failed, they would have been humble. If they had stayed at eBay, they would have been complacent. But by succeeding, and then immediately quitting, they walked out into the world with massive bank accounts, massive egos, and a massive chip on their shoulder. They were rich, bored, and convinced they were smarter than everyone else. And unfortunately, for the rest of the business world, they were right. They didn't retire to private islands. They took their eBay winnings and immediately pushed them all into the center of the table for the next hand. And this time, the stakes weren't just electronic payments. They were the future of humanity. So, the band broke up. The pirates abandoned the eBay ship. In a normal story, this is where the narrator tells you they all went on to live quiet, happy lives, maybe opening a vineyard in Napa, or becoming angel investors who bore people at cocktail parties. But you have to remember, these people were broken. The PayPal experience had rewired their brains. They had spent years believing that if they didn't work 100 hours a week, they would die. They had learned that regulations were just suggestions, that competitors were enemies to be destroyed, and that the only way to predict the future was to build it yourself before the other guy did. They were adrenaline junkies with 9-figure bank accounts, and the world was about to become their playground. This is the diaspora, and honestly, it looks less like a corporate alumni network and more like the spread of a highly successful biological weapon. Instead of retiring, they took their winnings and infected every single vertical of the modern economy. It wasn't enough to fix payments. They wanted to fix everything. Look at Elon Musk. He looked at his PayPal fortune, money that could have bought him a small country, and decided to set it on fire. He poured it into 2 industries that had been graveyards for capital for 50 years, cars and rockets. Everyone, including his friends, told him he was insane. They staged an intervention to stop him from starting SpaceX. He ignored them. He took the move fast and break things philosophy of software and applied it to literal explosives. He nearly went broke again in 2008, sleeping on friends' couches, divorced and ridiculed. But the PayPal callousness saved him. He didn't care about the rules of physics any more than he cared about banking regulations. Today, he controls the skies and the roads. Then, look at Peter Thiel. While Musk looked to the stars, Thiel looked into the shadows. He took his money and founded Palantir, a data mining company that is essentially the terrifying all-seeing eye of the intelligence community. If Musk is Iron Man, Thiel became the guy who runs SHIELD from a dark room. He also became the Don of the Valley, the first outside investor in Facebook, essentially crowning Mark Zuckerberg as the next emperor. He didn't just build companies, he built ideologies. And the rest? It's a roll call of digital dominance. Reid Hoffman, the adult in the room at PayPal, founded LinkedIn because apparently he thought the only thing more fun than working is talking about working. The engineers Chad Hurley, Steve Chen, and Jawed Karim got bored and wondered why they couldn't share videos of a dinner party online. They built a little site called YouTube. You might have heard of it. It's currently the replacement for television. Jeremy Stoppelman and Russell Simmons got tired of not knowing where to eat, so they built Yelp, weaponizing the Karen. Here is the twist that makes it a mafia. They never really left each other. They became a cartel. When one of them started a company, the others invested. When one needed advice, they called the others. They hired from the same pool of traumatized workaholics. They created a closed loop of power and capital that made it impossible for outsiders to compete. If you were pitching a startup in 2010 and you didn't have the blessing of a PayPal alumnus, good luck. They weren't just participating in the tech industry. They were the tech industry. The final statistic is the one that should keep you up at night. If you add up the market cap of the companies founded or funded by this single group of ex-employees, Tesla, SpaceX, Palantir, YouTube, LinkedIn, Yelp, Affirm, and their investments in Facebook, Airbnb, and Stripe, the total is well over $1 trillion. It is larger than the GDP of most nations on Earth. A group of 20-somethings who couldn't agree on a logo in a strip mall in Palo Alto now control how you drive, how you find a job, how you watch videos, how you pay for things, and how the government spies on you. They prove that with enough aggression, enough brilliance, and enough disregard for the status quo, a small group of people can hijack the world. They taught Silicon Valley that greed is good, speed is God, and disruption is the only virtue. We are all living in the world the PayPal Mafia built. They're just the ones collecting the rent.